Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 85. The first book today is Saint Anthony of the Desert, 251 AD to 356 AD by Saint Athanasius, who lived from 293 AD to 373 AD. This is a short book, 106 pages. Now, in our church Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda, our guru, talked about Antony spending many years alone in a tomb in the desert in Egypt praying. Okay? Satan appeared and said he would destroy him and started cracking the tomb. Anthony called for God and the Lord appeared. And then Satan disappeared. And then Anthony said, "Where have you been, Lord, all these years?" And God said, "Antony, I was with you just the same." Demons earlier had come and severely beaten him. And God spoke some more with Antony. He said, quote, "I was here, Antony, but I waited to see thy resistance. Therefore, since thou hast endured and not yielded, I will always be thy helper." Antony spent 20 years in solitude in the Sahara Desert. And he said, quote, "Virtue, therefore, needs only our will." In other words, we can be good people if we decide to be. Antony overcame all temptations, including visions of gold in the desert. This is a wonderful book, and of course, St. Anthony, a saint who lived a very long time ago, very inspiring. And it shows no matter what troubles we go through, maybe we think God isn't with us, but He is. He's with us. And He is helping us, even if we don't know it. Wonderful, very inspiring story of St. Anthony. The next book is Catcher, Lover, Spy by David W. Huffstetler, 2016. This was inspired by the life of Moe Berg. It's fiction, and it's very interesting. This fellow was a professional baseball player, played for the Cleveland Indians in 1931 and 1934. He was a spy for the United States in Japan, Brazil, and Europe, dealing with Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. He tried to stop the Nazi influence in Brazil, and he took photographs in Tokyo on an MLB, a goodwill tour. According to this book, he saved the Pope at one point and worked to stop Germany's atomic bomb program, and he wrote a report on the Holocaust. His lady love was named Stella. And then this is the novel. Now the next book is the title is "The Catcher Was a Spy: The Mysterious Life of Moe Berg" by Nicholas Dawidoff, 1994. Very interesting. Now this is a regular biography of Moe Berg, and he was a really interesting fellow, and he loved working as a spy for the United States in the OSS and the CIA. He loved to travel. Didn't want a steady job and developed a persona as the mysterious intellectual. What a life. Very interesting fellow. As an MLB, he was an MLB catcher, but he didn't play much. He was a bench player, and he didn't mind because what he loved about being a professional baseball player is that it gave him a lot of time. And of course, they traveled as MLB team. Professional baseball teams traveled. He loved the travel, and he loved having all this time on his hands, which he used to read. He loved reading the newspaper. He loved reading books, and he was an intellectual. Yeah, very interesting fellow. And so he didn't mind not playing. He just loved that lifestyle of being a professional baseball player. And then after, he spent some time as a spy, and then actually the last 20-some years of his life, he really didn't work. He didn't want to work. And he got away with it. And he had a lot, because he was famous as a pro baseball player, and he made a lot of friends, and he was an interesting fellow. So people enjoyed his company. And so he lived with his brother, his sister, and he would visit people, and so that's how he sort of made a living, by being a person that people enjoyed his company. And when he played for Cleveland, actually he didn't play much, but he said the best thing he did, he took the son of the owner during rainy days when there was no games. He took them to the museums in Cleveland. And really a very interesting fellow, Moe Berg. The next book is Hernando, DeSoto, Savage Quest in the Americas by David Ewing Duncan, 1995. This book is 425 pages. It's a pretty grim book, and this is a pretty depressing, actually. In history, there's a lot of tragedy in history. This fellow, Hernando DeSoto, was born in 1500 in Spain. He came to the New World, north and the Americas, North and South America, spent time in Central America, played a major role with Francisco Pizarro in the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in South America, and became wealthy. Then of course, that was based on this all this gold and silver that they acquired from the Incas. Then he came or led a major expedition in what would become the United States from 1539 till his death in 1542, looking for another gold and silver empire. They're hoping to find something similar to what they had found in Mexico and Peru. He traveled through what became Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, where he sickened and died. He killed a lot of American Indians, enslaved many, in his depressing quest for wealth. Tragic. The obsession with wealth, and a reign of terror. And actually a lot of Indians died. Yeah, Indians were terrorized. And the Spanish were outnumbered, but they were terrified, but they kept going. Now the Inca Empire, going back which he had been a part of the conquest of, there was this brutal code of conformity. So even though the Spanish, have a pretty bad reputation, well, these empires that they defeated, I know the Aztecs as well. So the Incas, the people were forced to wear certain clothes, and the language spoken was something they were required. What work they did, what gods they worshipped. So the Inca Empire was really a very controlling. The people had very little personal freedom. The beautiful Indian golden art was destroyed by the Spanish. The gold melted into bars. And this Incan high priest said to the Spanish, quote, "How dare you enter here? Anyone who enters here has to fast for a year beforehand and must enter barefoot and bearing a load." Now, the Indians in Arkansas surrendered to Soto, saying their ancestors predicted a white race would inevitably subdue them. Very interesting. So this Hernando DeSoto, I think it's it's very depressing. It's his history. The terrible things human beings have done to other humans, man's inhumanity to man, and the quest for wealth, power, and fame. The next book is 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles C. Mann, 2005. 416 pages, very interesting book. The author argues that the American Indian population was much larger than believed. One of the biggest blanks in history, the Western Hemisphere, in other words, North and South America, before 1492. Tens of millions of people mostly vanished, disappeared by death through disease, and history lost. All the sickness that happened to American Indians in both North and South America after Europeans came and brought diseases that they had no immunity for. The Europeans brought metal to America. Apparently no metal in Americas. Starting in 1616, in 3 years, 90% of the Indians in New England died. What's now Massachusetts, that area. That's hard to believe. In a 3-year period, 90% of the Indians died there. The Inca kings, now this is going in South America, the ground was too dirty to receive his saliva. So the Inca kings would spit into the hands of a courtier, and then they needed to spit, and then the courtiers would wipe their hands with a special cloth, which was stored for safekeeping. It shows how crazy about how much the Inca kings were revered. And now Cahokia is near the Mississippi River. In the American South, apparently there were 15,000 people, a pretty big city, the most urban place north of the Rio Grande in the 18th century. The Amazon River, 1/5 of the Earth's above-ground fresh water. Wow. The American Indians influenced European immigrants to be more democratic. That's interesting. Yeah, usually you think of democracy developing in England and so forth, but apparently American Indians had a lot of democracy, and there was contact. So yeah, this just shows, or the author makes the case that just so many people died, and it's just we'll never know very much about the history of North and South America, because there was just a drastic loss of life so quickly, and when that happens, history is lost, and we don't really know very much about the history of the people of North and South America. The next book is Havana Heat by Darrell Brock, 2000. This is a fine book. It's the story of Dummy Taylor. Years ago, deaf people would often have the nickname Dummy, meaning, anyway, he was this baseball player named Dummy Taylor. He was a deaf pitcher. One-time star for the New York Giants, traveled to Cuba in 1911 with John McGraw and the New York Giants to play in exhibition baseball games in Cuba, hoping to revive his career. He encounters and befriends a deaf youth pitcher and realizes his mission is to inspire deaf kids. This is an outstanding book. Darrell Brock is a tremendous author. He decided to write a book about this person, this deaf pitcher, and who actually pitched for Cleveland briefly, and so he just and he read that he had gone to Cuba trying to revive his career, and so he came up with this story, and you really feel like you're part of it. You're in Cuba, and you're with this fellow, and he's deaf, so his life and so forth. A wonderful book. Darrell Brock is an outstanding author. The next book is Jim Thorpe, a biography by William A. Cook, 2011. 202 pages. This is a fine book. Jim Thorpe was a Sac and Fox American Indian. Tremendous athlete. He's in the Pro Football and College Football Halls of Fame. He played football, high school football, with Pop Warner at the Carlisle, Pennsylvania Indian School. He was an MLB baseball player from 1913 to 1919 with the New York Giants. Also played for the Cincinnati Reds and Boston Braves. He won gold medals at the 1912 Stockholm, Sweden Olympics. Pro football player from 1915 to 1928 for the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Indians football team, the Marion, Ohio Oorang Indians, the New York Giants, and the Chicago Cardinals. Unfortunately, he was a heavy drinker. Yeah, I think he was probably an alcoholic. Married 3 times. Was buried in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. These people in this small town in Pennsylvania decided they wanted to. They made an offer to his widow. If you bury him here, we'll rename the town after Jim Thorpe, and that's what happened. I think he's still buried there. And you can travel to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, and visit his grave. This is maybe the greatest athlete of all time. Yeah, he had trouble getting along with John McGraw. He was an American Indian. He was stripped of his Olympic medals. Terrible. And I think those have been restored long after his death, because he had, you're supposed to be an amateur, and he'd made some money playing baseball. He became a Hollywood movie actor for a while. He would have long football punts and rushes. Tremendous player. What a guy. And according to this book, in 1932, the U.S. Vice President Charles Curtis was 1/8 American Indian. Wonderful book. The next book is Two in the Field by Darrell Brock, 2002. 393 pages. Wonderful book. This is the sequel to the book If I Never Get Back. Time Travel, which was time travel about the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings, the first professional baseball team that did not lose a game, won every game in that 1869. Now in this book, the character, this guy Sam Fowler, who was living in the present, in recent times, somehow he ended up going back in time once, then he came back to the present in the 1980s or what, something like that. And anyway, so now, again, he ends up somehow back in time, and this time in 1875, pursuing his lady love. Yeah, he'd been sort of haunted. He fell in love when he went back the first time in time to 1869. Now he wanted to go back and find this gal that he fell in love with. And she was from Ireland. Her name was Kate. And so, and during this book, he meets Mark Twain at one point, also General George Custer, and Crazy Horse, the American Indian, and as well as his former. The first book, he had played with these guys from the 1869 Reds, so lots of adventure. He ends up with this gal that he was, and it's wonderful time travel book. Darrell Brock, an outstanding author. The next book is The Power and the Darkness. The Life of Josh Gibson and the Shadows of the Game by Mark Ribowski, 1996. This is a tremendous book. Josh Gibson, the Black Babe Ruth, born in 1911, died in 1947, died young. Negro League baseball star from 1930 to 1946. He played for the Homestead Grays, Pittsburgh Crawfords. He played in the Dominican Republic and Mexico. 12-time Negro League All-Star. He won 2 Negro League World Series championships. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He had his famous duels with Satchel Page, who was the greatest Negro League pitcher. And again, he developed a problem with alcoholism, which played a role, and I believe drug addiction played a role, and he's a tremendous player, and he was never allowed. By the time he died, 1947, that was the year that Jackie Robinson became the first black player in a long time, and the integration of baseball. But it was too late for Josh Gibson, so we'll never know how well he could have done. But we do know, and he has been recognized for his achievements posthumous. Tremendous player, Josh Gibson. The next book is The Pitcher and the Dictator, Satchel Page's Unlikely Season in the Dominican Republic by Averill Ace Smith, 2018. Fairly short book, 185 pages. Satchel Page, I mentioned earlier, really considered the greatest Negro League baseball player of all time. Played for Cleveland, and in this case, he played 1937. He played in the Dominican Republic, which is the eastern two-thirds of the island of Hispaniola, which it shares with Haiti. He played on the team which was owned by the dictator, Rafael Trujillo. 1937, the Ciudad Trujillo Dragons. And so it was, these black guys, black players especially, enjoyed going down there, Mexico and the Caribbean, and where they were treated better, probably, and making good money, and tropical paradise, but a political hell. Yeah, and it was tough because you had this dictator, and he said, you got to win. And they felt they were kind of scared because they thought, what's going to happen? But they did win this championship, which is why they were brought in by the dictator Trujillo. This is a wonderful book, very interesting. The next book is Satchel, The Life and Times of an American Legend by Larry Tye, 2009. 298 pages, a wonderful book. The Life of Satchel Page. Born in 1906, died in 1982, baseball pitching legend. Played for the Cleveland Cubs Negro League team in 1931, the Cleveland Indians from 1948 to 49. In the Negro Leagues, he played for the Birmingham Black Barons, Pittsburgh Crawfords, Kansas City Monarchs. In the Dominican Republic for the Trujillo All-Stars. Also for the St. Louis Browns in MLB and the Kansas City Athletics. His career from 1926 to 1965. He was a real entertainer. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Funny guy, old Satch. Yeah, he played a role in Cleveland winning their last World Series in 1948, Satchel Page. The next book is The Glory of Their Times, the story of the early days in baseball by the men who played it, by Lawrence S. Ritter, 1966. Wonderful book. These fellows, they talked to the author and told their memories, years later. And the guys that Lawrence Ritter interviewed included Stan Kovaleski, who was a star for Cleveland when they won the title in 1920. Smokey Joe Wood, star in Boston and Cleveland. Bill Wamsgans, who played for Cleveland, got that unassisted triple play in the 20 World Series. Sad Sam Jones, Willie Cam, Hank Greenberg, and others. And there's a funny interlude or anecdote. Hans Lobert regarding Andy Coakley, and he would say, if you're in the middle of an argument and you think you're going to lose, he'd say, this is what you would say, quote, Being unable to assume an initial premise with any tolerable degree of accuracy, I am loath to assert a conclusion, fearful lest I should err. So very eloquent, and these guys you're baseball players. That's wonderful. We got to revive things like that. Try to be more literate and more expressive. Wonderful book. The next book is Abner and Me, a baseball card adventure by Dan Gutman, 2005. Fine book. This is a children's book, although I read all of these baseball card adventures. They're wonderful. The character Joe Stoshak, who's like a 15-year-old boy, he travels with his mother back to 1863 to find out if Abner Doubleday invented baseball, which is the myth. In the book, he experiences the Battle of Gettysburg in the U.S. Civil War and meets Doubleday, who denies inventing baseball. And Joe, this boy, he plays some baseball under the old rules and experiences the horrors of war. Time travel with this. Yeah, Dan Gutman did such a good job with these time travel baseball card books. The next book is I Was Right on Time by Buck ONeil with Steve Wolf and David Conrad's 1996. Wonderful book. Buck ONeil, born in 1911, died in 2006, a Negro League baseball player for the Memphis Red Sox in 1937, the Kansas City Monarchs from 1938 to 49. He played with Satchel Page, then he became a Chicago Cubs scout, the first black MLB coach with the Cubs. Very good, man. He had such a good attitude. And the thing is, I love the title of the book because he did not get to play Major League Baseball because when integration came, he was too old. And but you see his attitude. He said, I was right on time. When people would say, oh, it was such a shame you didn't get to play, by the time they integrated. And he said, no. He said, I was right on time. Such a good attitude. Wonderful. Really enjoyed this book. The next book is The Most Famous Woman in Baseball, Effa Manley and the Negro Leagues by Bob Luke, 2011. This is a wonderful book. Effa Manley with her husband, Abe Manley, they were the owner of the Newark Eagles, which was a Negro League baseball team. And they owned the team from 1935 to 1946. She was very outspoken. She tried to improve the Negro Leagues. She was very angry at Branch Rickey for paying the Kansas City Monarchs nothing for Jackie Robinson when he signed Robinson to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And she was heartbroken about the demise of the Negro Leagues because that's what happened after integration came. I think they ended up selling their team, but all the teams ended up going out of business because black Americans stopped supporting the Negro Leagues, and they were focused on these the teams that had black players like Jackie Robinson and so forth, and Cleveland Indians with Larry Doby. But Effa Manley, this is back in the late 30s and 40s, and she enters a man's world, professional baseball, in this case the Negro Leagues, but became a powerful force in her own right. So wonderful, very, very interesting story of Effa Manley. Here in Cleveland, we had the 19th century Cleveland baseball symposium about a year ago, and they had the MLB historian John Thorne was there, and I talked with him probably too much, and he got mad at me, and I mentioned Effa Manley at one point, and he looked at me like, why are you talking about Effa Manley? But I think she's a very interesting person. The next book is Integrating Cleveland Baseball, Media Activism, the Integration of the Cleveland Indians, and the Demise of the Negro League Buckeyes by Stephanie M. Liscio, 2010. It's a good book. It's a story of Negro League baseball in Cleveland from 1920 to 1950. Various teams included the Cleveland Tate Stars, the Giants, Cubs, Browns, Red Sox, and Buckeyes. Some of the players included Satchel Page, Sam the Jet Jethro, and Quincy Troop, and they won the championship, the Negro League World Series in 1945. Of course, Larry Doby and Satchel Page with Cleveland Indians in 1948, the big title year when Cleveland won the World Series. So this was interesting. And she talks about the role the newspapers played, the black newspapers played, in pressuring the Cleveland Indians to sign a black player. And of course, which ended up leading to the end of the Negro Leagues and the Negro League teams in Cleveland. It's a good job by Stephanie Liscio. The next book is Praying for Gil Hodges, a memoir of the 1955 World Series by Thomas Oliphant, 2005. This is a beautiful book. The author was 10 years old in 1955. He and his parents were diehard Brooklyn Dodgers fans. They exulted when, quote, "dem bums" won the title. A very touching book. And it's the title of the book is based on during the summer of '55 in Brooklyn. There was a Catholic mass one day, and the priest said it's too hot for a homily, for a sermon. So say the rosary and pray for Gil Hodges, who was the Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman who was in a slump. And so that was nice, this priest talking about praying for this baseball player. And that was their year when they won the championship and then, of course, moved to Los Angeles, which was the pretty tough, only a few years later. The next book is Ray and Me by Dan Gutman, 2009. Wonderful book. Again, this 15-year-old Joe Stoshak time travels back to 1920, trying to save the life of Cleveland Indians' Ray Chapman, who was killed after he was hit by the pitch in the head in a game at Yankee Stadium in New York, or at the Polo Grounds in New York, by Carl Mays, the Yankee pitcher. Again, another baseball card adventure. Recently, if you've watched, we had a video on Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio, famous people, and Ray Chapman is buried there. And if you watch that video, you'll see his grave. We found his grave, and people up till now, Cleveland Indians fans or pro baseball fans go there and leave things. They leave gloves and caps and balls and bats and so forth in memory of Ray Chapman. So that's really nice. Okay, the next book is It's Good to Be Alive, Roy Campanella, 1959. What a wonderful book. The life of Roy Campanella. He was born in 1921 and died in 1993. Played in the Negro Leagues for the Baltimore Elite Giants from 1937 to 1942, and the Brooklyn Dodgers from 1948 to 1957. Three-time National League MVP, and he's in the Hall of Fame. On January 28, 1958, he was in a bad car accident and never walked again. He couldn't walk. He eventually had some ability to move his arms and hands, but you can see this. He had such a good attitude. Obviously this is a devastating experience that if you go through. You imagine one day he's this professional baseball player and a star. One of the best players. And he's a catcher, which is such a tough position. And then all of a sudden, he can't walk, and he never walked again. But you can see the attitude, just kind of like Buck ONeil. It's good to be alive. So he overcame that and developed a positive attitude. And even though he was in a wheelchair for the rest of his life, he was an inspiration to people, to keep going. And he developed a very strong spiritual life. And he talked about God and how, that's really what helped him to be happy, even though this catastrophe had happened to him. The next book is Jackie Robinson, I Never Had It Made, an autobiography by Jackie Robinson, 1972. This is a really good book. Jackie Robinson was born in 1919, died in 1972 at age 53, died way too young. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers from 1947 to 1956, and he played for the Kansas City Monarchs in the Negro Leagues in 1945. Yeah, there were a few African-American professional baseball players in the 19th century, but then they eventually stopped letting them in. So so he became really the first African American in modern times, which led to the integration of MLB, Major League Baseball. His son Jackie Jr. ended up in the U.S. Army in Vietnam, and had some tough times there. Developed drug addiction, but recovered. But then died in a car accident in 1971 at age 24. I think that played her, and then Jackie himself died the following year. That's the thing that I thought was so touching about this book, and tragic. This fellow lost his son. He was and it was so tough because his son had been troubled, but then was doing well. He'd overcome his demons, and he'd overcome his problems with drugs and alcohol, and then. So that they were all happy. Oh, wow, it's wonderful. Jackie Jr. is doing well. And then he died. So, only 24. So that was really, really tough. To be continued. Well, that concludes today's presentation. I hope you find a good book to read or have a good book to read. And there's so many amazing books that have been written, history or otherwise. And These incredible the work that the authors do, and such a wonderful gift they give us by the books that they write and that are available to read. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray, at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.